So speaking of lessons, lesson 6, be honest and
Mm-hmm.
transparent. How do you handle situations where honesty might lead to very difficult conversations or it could potentially lead to
Yeah.
conflict management? How do you handle that?
Yeah. So I found that being honest up front is always easier than being honest later. Right.
Mm,
So like, when I was a product manager for an antivirus product, right, I got yelled at on a pretty regular basis by customers. And, they would have an issue. They would call support. Support would call me. I would try to figure out how to fix it. Sometimes I could fix it. Sometimes I couldn't. And if I couldn't fix it, then I would do the phone call with the customer. I would tell support, put me on the call with the customer and I'll talk to him. And I always found that just being honest with them and saying, listen, here's the situation. You're looking for
mm,
X. I'm not able to deliver X because of the following situation or data or whatever. I'll work with you to try to find a workaround. But it was always like, I found when I told them right up front, I'm not going to be able to do this for you. And
mm,
here's why. Not because I don't want to, but there's actual impediments in my way. They were never happy, but they were
mm.
very pleased that I let them know immediately as opposed to leading them on that we were going to have it fit. We're going to fix it. We're
Yeah.
going to fix it. And then 3 months down the road, we're still not fixed. And they're like, now you're impacting my business. Right. So
Yeah.
I think like kind of biting that bullet and finding a way to deliver news that somebody might not want to hear in a way that's factual, like not
Mm,
impersonal, but
hmm.
factual, right? Like
Yeah.
here's what I've tried. I'm committed to helping, but I can't get there because of
Mm,
this. That always worked really well for me. And even in employee discussions that are difficult, right? Where,
mm,
maybe you have to tell an employee they're not performing the way they should, or maybe
mm,
you have to tell an employee that the way they interacted with that customer left something to be desired, right? Having a very kind of matter of fact conversation where they understand what you expect and how what they did not meet expectations. It's a lot
mm,
easier for them to figure out how to like correct the behavior later if you're
mm.
just feelingly frank,
Yeah.
if that makes a sense, right? Be frank and honest, but
Yeah.
empathetic at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah, I love that. You made me think of a book, and I'm trying to like look around my desk, but it's called Radical Candor. And it
Okay.
did just that. It was like having that level of empathy where if somebody is not performing, it's your role as a leader to let them know so that they can get better. Because when it gets to that time or that, where, hey, you got to be let go and you never talk to them and had that candid conversation, you did them a disservice. So that's what you made me think of that when you said that comment. And
It's also
I'm, go ahead.
they have to know what you expect of them, Lynnice. Like that's what
Totally.
I think a lot of times leaders fail at or managers fail at with both is maybe someone thinks they were doing what you wanted them to do. Like I thought I was doing my job.
Yeah.
And the reality is that as a leader, we didn't clearly communicate what are our expectations for their performance. And again, that's on us.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
unfortunately, the
Agree.
individual is usually the one that bears the brunt of our failure.
Now, to the opposite of that, was there ever a time where you experienced a lack of transparency that could have led to misunderstandings or negative consequences?
Working relationships are built on trust. We talked about that a little bit
Yeah.
earlier. And,
Mm-hmm.
when you're not candid and transparent in your communication, it it creates a rift in trust. And I've had experience where, a colleague would act like everything was fine when they talked to me. And then they would talk to my boss and tell him how, I wasn't doing something right or someone on my team wasn't doing something right, where he could have easily had that conversation with me and we could have addressed it
Mm-hmm.
directly and I could have addressed it with the employee. But instead, it went up the chain and then back down to me. And frankly, that destroyed the working relationship at some level because I completely lost trust in that individual.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, there was a strain on the working relationship from that point forward. And, that wasn't
Mm-hmm.
good for either of us. It wasn't good for the org, and it wasn't good for the people who reported into us, because all those people could always feel
Yeah.
that. And, then you have to try to rebuild that trust. And that takes a really long time.
Now, lesson 7 is seek out mentor. So, how has seeking out a mentor had a significant impact in your growth or decision making?
Yeah. So I've had both formal and informal mentors, and I think they're equally important. So I think, there have been times in my career where I've had people pull me aside and say, hey, I think there's going to be an opportunity to do X, but you're going to need to be ready for that. So you should probably spend some time on, A, B, and C in the next 6 months or so, which is always incredibly
Mm,
helpful. I've had mentors who became champions for me when I'm not in the room, right? A
mm,
mentor, especially if they're a senior exec, will often be your champion. And the reality is that a lot of decisions around promotions and hiring get made when you are not present. And having,
mm-hmm,
a mentor or two who can be your champion, as well as someone who's
mm-hmm,
given you guidance on kind of how to attain your goals, is incredibly valuable. I think
mm-hmm,
when I say, you know, um, men and women mentors, I think as a woman, it's been critically important for me to have male mentors because
mm,
I worked in such a male dominated industry.
mm-hmm.
And frankly, there weren't a lot of opportunities for female mentors because there weren't that many female executives for me to have as a mentor, right? But
Sure.
understanding how the men that I work with think, what's important to
Mm,
them, how they how they think about solving problems, how they think about decision making, how they formulate strategy.
mm,
Because I work primarily with men all these years, it was really important that I understand how they think, because oftentimes men and women think differently. It's just a
mm,
reality. And it
mm-hmm.
helped immensely to kind of be able to get that insight from, men that I worked with that were willing to share that knowledge and wisdom with me.
Yeah, it goes back to what you were saying, I feel like, on diversity, and not only just having it as diversity on your team, but even diversity in terms of your own personal board of directors and mentors and getting,
Sure.
different levels of thinking, just like you had said.
Absolutely. And
Now,
I think it's critically important, by the way, for men to have women for mentors as well,
oh,
right? So that,
mm-hmm,
if they're working for a female manager, or they have a lot of women on their team, or like, again, have a diverse, say, personal board of directors, as you kind of said it,
mm-hmm.
that can give you that different perspective as you're kind of charting your path.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. Now, lesson number 8, the 60% fit rule.
Yeah.
And now, based on research, men apply for roles when they meet 60% of job requirements, whereas women won't apply unless they meet 100%. All right, Candace, let us know. What's your thoughts on this research?
So I think it's probably pretty true. I've talked to a lot of women about this over the years as I've presented these. And like, women in the room will be like, yeah, if I don't meet like 80, 100%, I don't apply. They just
Hmm.
don't. And, the research shows that, the man that's applying for the same job will. And kudos to him, by the way. Like, that's not a criticism of him. Like, he's doing
Mm-hmm.
exactly what he should be doing. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
with women, we oftentimes strive for perfection. And if we can't hit 100%, then like we shouldn't be applying. And the reality is that
Mm,
no, no candidate will ever hit 100% of the requirements. And if they are, they're probably applying for a job they're overqualified for, right? So if you're
mm,
applying for a job
mm-hmm.
that's going to kind of take you to that next level, you should assume that you're not going to have 100% of the requirements. Because if you do, you may be underselling yourself.
It's interesting. I never thought about it that way of because I'm in that camp where I always, if I look at a job rec, I always feel like I have to check off the box. Do I meet every single one of these? And I think the biggest piece that I get terrified of is, well, shit, what's going to be my response if an employer asks me about a certain skill set that I don't have?
Right.
You know. It's like, what's that response
So
supposed to be?
I think the response is, yeah, that's an area that I've not experienced before. However, here's why I believe
Mm,
that won't impact my ability to do this job. Because the knowledge I have is transferable to a different industry, for example. I haven't worked in insurance. I've worked in tech, right?
mm,
Okay. But here's why that knowledge and experience is transferable to your industry. Here's why that knowledge and experience is transferable to a different functional role. Like, think about, have you ever thought about the chronological resume versus the functional resume, right? Where you
mm,
line out your
mm-hmm,
jobs over the course of the years versus the other types of resumes are really about, here's the experience that I have. Here's the knowledge that I have. Well, when you peel away the chronology, when you peel away the company name, the experience and the knowledge that you have is really what the company is after. You can
mm,
learn an industry. You can learn a product. A lot of those other skills that you bring to the table when you apply for a role, those are learned skills, right? Those are
mm,
things you learn
mm-hmm.
having worked for a number of years. Those can be applied generically to other industries, roles, functions, etc. And I think we forget that. We forget to sell
Mm-hmm.
the experience itself rather than the industry or the job title that we were in.
Yeah. Now, do you feel there is any downside of applying, even if you don't meet all the listed requirements? I feel like I know the answer to this, but curious to hear it from you.
Well, so I'll respond with a question of my own. Like,
Yeah.
what's going to happen if you do? Like, nobody's going to show up with sunglasses and a black suit at your front door and, like, you know, interrogate you over why you've applied for a job that you're not qualified for. Nobody's going to shame you publicly. Like worst case, they're just not going to call you for an interview. Best case,
Mm.
they call you for an interview. Like, what is the downside?
Well, I think when you put
I mean,
it
there's
that way,
very little.
it's funny because yeah, there's very well, and it's somewhat in parallel, kind of relates. But I remember I was in sales, and I just remember thinking, I was like, oh man, this customer's going to be so upset with me, and I have to communicate something. And I remember my sales leader saying, "What's the worst thing that's going to happen, Lynnice? Are they going to beat you up?" And I'm like, well, that was
Right.
aggressive. No, they're just, they're going to be disappointed. So it's
Right.
kind of similar to this. It's, if you apply, great. If you don't get it, moving on to the next one. I like that.
Exactly.
So lesson 9. Emotional intelligence is as important, if not more important, than your technical degree, and a whole lot harder to teach and learn. All right, Candace. So how do you define emotional intelligence, and why is it considered a valid skill in personal and professional growth?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to read Harvard Business Review's description of emotional intelligence because I think it's really good. Emotional intelligence is defined as the ability to understand and manage your emotions, as well as recognize and influence the emotions of those around you. Personally, I think it just boils down to self-awareness and self-control and empathy for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just think about that, self-awareness, self-control, and empathy for other people, like, when do we not have to apply any of those three things in the work that we do,
Mm-hmm.
or our personal lives? Like, every day we're trying to be self-aware. We're, self-control, get out of bed, go to work every day. Right. And hopefully
Yeah.
we're also showing empathy for others, especially if we're managers or leaders.
Can you describe a scenario where a lack of emotional intelligence may have hindered your growth?
Yeah, I can. So, again, probably not my proudest moment in my history, but I think it's important that we all share those so that people know that
Mm-hmm.
that failure is okay. I applied for an office manager job and I got the job. And it was my first management role. I had never managed people before. I was going to be managing 2 people, a receptionist, and I can't remember the role of the other person. And about, I think 3 or 4 months, maybe 6 months into the role, one of those people had a pretty serious health issue. And they weren't getting their job done. They kept missing work. And I did not show empathy. I was so focused on being successful in my new role, being successful as a manager, a first time manager, that I completely failed as a first time manager because I didn't show empathy for this person's situation. And as a result of that, I got fired. And back then, and what I was told by the person was that you just lack, we believe you lack the maturity for the role. Having, a lot of years of experience under my belt now, as I look back on that, it was 100% a lack of EQ. I just didn't have the emotional intelligence to understand how to handle that situation appropriately. And it cost me my job. And, I learned from that, obviously, but, and, hopefully other people don't have to lose their job to learn from it. But in retrospect, that's probably part of why I feel that EQ is so critical to our success in business. If we're not empathetic to our customers' challenges, if we're not empathetic to our employees' challenges, frankly, even empathetic to our boss, who often is under incredible pressure, we're probably not doing as good a job as we could be in our role.
Yeah. To me, it's so wild to hear you say that, because I would go on the record and say you probably have the highest EQ of all the executives that I have had the pleasure to work with. And so, I think it's a great early lesson in your career, and clearly it has paid off tenfold. But I also think it's just a reminder yeah, and you didn't pay me for it.
I didn't,
but it's true.
But thank you.
Yeah, well, it's true. And I think it is that piece that people, they miss a lot of the time, is just humanizing. Even those, like, I remember early in my career, I'm like, how could my manager do that? And just lacking that EQ of knowing she was doing at the time actually everything in her power to help me. I didn't know all those things that were going in. And if I could have just had a little more empathy in not being selfish in my mindset, then, it probably would have helped and we would have had a greater relationship. So thank you for sharing that, though. Now, lesson 10.
Maturity helps a lot. Maturity helps a lot with EQ, Lynnice. So.
It is funny, actually. As you say that, I have to agree with you that maturity does help, because it wasn't, I think maturity and experience, I would say, which could, go hand in hand. Yeah. But it was funny because I found myself in that same example. I found myself being that person saying, hey, you got to understand, this person they have your back. They're going through a lot. This is what's going on their plate. I'm like, right. Oh man, I've really reached a milestone here.
Exactly.
Okay. Lesson 10, work-life balance is in your hands. The company can only take as much as you give them. So based on your experience, how did you take control of your work-life balance and achieve that satisfying equilibrium?
So, I think I had to decide what was most important to me. And I'm pretty career focused, as you know. But, I made the decision fairly early in my career that I wouldn't trade off family for career. And so I've spent my entire career living in Portland, Oregon, which is, not the epicenter of high tech. I mean, we got a good high tech industry here, but it's certainly not the Valley. And I made trade-offs, right? I probably could have progressed up the ladder much more rapidly had I been in San Jose, Palo Alto, somewhere like that, versus Portland, Oregon. But for me, I was willing to take a slower progression in my career so that I could be closer to my family and enjoy, people like my grandparents while they were still with me, as opposed to, pursuing that rapid career growth. And then at some point in the future going, God, I wish I'd spent more time with my grandparents. Right. I didn't want to be that ladder in that ladder place, because you can't correct that. Right. That was a one-way door, so to speak. Right. And so I made a trade-off there, and it served me well. I'm very happy with kind of the progress that I made. Despite having made that decision. I think I'm an example of how you can manage your career in a way that allows you to still maintain personal priorities without completely compromising on professional aspirations.
Yeah. I love that. Was there ever a moment in your career? Because I love how you said maybe it was a slower path, but were there ever times within your career where you felt conflicted and maybe you were asked to move to Silicon Valley? And how did you bring it back to your values and stay true to what was, your own personal goals?
Yeah, so I was asked to move to Silicon Valley when I worked for Mentor Graphics, and I had a team of I think about 12 or 14. Half of them were in Portland, half were in San Jose. They wanted me to move to San Jose, and I own my own home in Portland. And I looked at prices in the Valley, and I went to my boss and said, "You can't afford to move me. Like seriously." Like, so
Yeah.
it's less expensive for you to just pay me to fly down there once a week than it is for you to move me down there and basically, compensate me so that I can find a place to live. And luckily that business argument, it worked. So, they let me fly each week instead of moving. And then with McAfee, we had an office here in Portland where I was hired. It was an engineering, kind of product office. And, I kind of became the senior leader in that office. So it was nice for them to have a senior leader here. And I had no trouble traveling. They allowed me to travel or, asked me to travel, and wherever they wanted me to go, I went. So I think, having that flexibility that just because I lived here didn't mean I couldn't be anywhere in the world at the drop of a hat made a huge difference in terms of, I think, the tolerance people had for me wanting to live here instead of somewhere else.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. Now we have our last two lessons. So I'm going to continue. Lesson 11, confidence without humility is arrogance. So what does it mean to be humble for you, Candace? And how does humility manifest in your interactions?
Yeah, so, I talked about growing up around my grandparents, and whenever I maybe got a little too big for my britches, as they would say, I would basically get told, listen, you put your pants on the same way everybody else does, or, you're getting too big for your britches. I don't know quite why you think you're better than anybody else, but you're not. Right. So like they were always my grounding rod. Like if I started to get, a little full of myself, they were always
family coming in with the truth.
Exactly. Yeah, they got very, very real, very fast if they thought you were, not being humble in your personal life or your role. And so for me, that was kind of that grounding point where, like, in my head, whenever I feel a little bit of that ego taking over and taking control, I'm always like, my grandparents' voices in the back of my head saying, you're getting a little big for your britches. The reality for me is that there is always someone else that knows more than I do about a topic. Even if I'm an expert, there's somebody else that knows more. And so for me, it's critically important to try to learn from whoever I'm interacting with, to assume that they may have knowledge or experience or a point of view that I haven't seen, heard, experienced, or contemplated before. And without humility, you don't listen to that. You don't hear those voices, right? Because you know all the answers. My guess is everybody listening to this has worked for that person who knew everything, who had all the good ideas, who sometimes took your idea and made it their own and presented it. I think we've all worked for that person as well. And to me, that's the epitome of arrogance. A humble person would have said, listen, my team did an amazing job, right? Like here are the people that worked on this project. They brought it across the line on time. I could not be happier with their performance.
Yeah.
And guess what? Did I have to say I did a good job managing them? No, I don't have to say that. The fact that they did a great job is instant acknowledgement that I'm obviously hiring good people and managing the team well. And so I think oftentimes the best managers that I've ever had, or the best leaders I've seen, they don't have to talk about how good they are. Right?
Well, and you kind of mentioned this briefly too. In what ways does confidence without that humility, how does that lead to arrogance? And most importantly, what are the consequences of that behavior?
I think what happens is people shut down, right? If you know all the answers, if Every time somebody gives you an idea, you have a better idea. If it's the one-upsmanship, at some point, people are
Mm-hmm.
like, why bother? Why
Yeah.
bother to give them any ideas? Why bother to give them my opinion? They're going to know better anyway, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you end up shutting down that funnel if
Mm-hmm.
if you're not open to other people's ideas because you are always the smartest person in the room. And then I think that will result in a performance impact for your team and for the company, especially if you're fairly senior.
Mm-hmm.
That can
Yeah.
have a pretty broad range impact on the company as a result of that.
So the last lesson that we have, lesson 12,
Mm-hmm.
you are paid to make the hard calls.
Yeah.
If it's not hard, then you're probably not delegating enough. So, how do
Yeah.
you define the role of leadership in making challenging decisions, and how does it contribute to the success of a team or an organization?
Yeah. So I was at a conference. Vista Partners put on a conference for the C-suite women in their portfolio
Mm,
companies, and I had the benefit of being invited to attend that. And the lady who was kind of the not coordinator, but she kind of was the person up in front of the room managing the conversations and everything. At one point, she reminded all of us, you know, your jobs are brutal. They're hard. You work long hours. Sometimes your challenges seem impossible to solve. And, I'm just here to remind you, you're paid to solve hard problems. Like if you're in the C
mm,
suite and you're solving easy problems, you're not delegating because
mm,
the stuff that you should be spending your time on at your pay grade should be damn hard.
mm.
Because if it's not, why is someone on your team not taking that instead of you? And it was like
Yeah.
one of those moments where you're sort of like, well, I kind of knew that, but having someone say it out loud, it was actually incredibly impactful. Because, I kind of went back
Yeah.
to the office and, you have those days where it's like, okay, could someone please just throw me a bone? Could I have an easy problem today? And when I would feel that way, I'd be like, hey, Candace, guess what? You get paid to do the hard stuff. So get over it. And it
Mm-hmm.
was a great
Mm-hmm.
way to remind myself that, you know, when you achieve that level in an organization, the organization is counting on you to leverage every aspect of yourself, your experience, your
Mm,
knowledge, your wisdom, your intuition in
mm-hmm.
evaluating hard or impossible problems and trying to come to a conclusion around how we can solve those in a way that will benefit the customer, the company, the employee, whoever, the best, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you
Mm-hmm.
know, as an executive, being able to delineate what's a hard problem and what's a problem that I should be able to delegate is a really critical skill because you
Mm,
want to delegate as much as you can to employees to give them growth opportunities. Because if you're solving all the problems, you're not
yeah.
growing your team and you're probably not
Mm,
using your
mm-hmm.
time well as in
Yeah.
addition. But
Yeah.
some problems you really have to take on yourself. Some problems
Mm,
it's worthwhile partnering with somebody on your team. If it's a hard problem, partner with somebody on the team, give them an opportunity to learn how to approach solving those. But I think that's kind of the impact it has on the org is, if you're not delegating well, you're not going to have enough
yeah.
time to really focus
Mm-hmm.
on being creative about solving those problems. And you're not giving your team opportunities to
Yeah.
grow either.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you said that. It made me think of this amazing advice that I learned from someone actually when we were at McAfee, and it was one of my first times in becoming into management, and I was struggling with delegation. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
she told me, she said, "Lynnice, you got to ask yourself: is this something only I can do, or is this something
Yep.
that somebody else can do?" And I thought, wow, that was brilliant. That's actually really easy. It was almost like that moment that you said you're at the conference, and it was like we kind of knew that, but I still clutched my pearls. But then I also felt empowered
Right.
at the same time. So,
Absolutely.
but I do have to,
Absolutely.
I do have to. I have to ask though. So, you are paid to make the hard decisions, but what happens when you make the wrong decision? And how do you remediate that situation?
Yeah. So this is, I think, one of the most important things for a leader. And I'm being very clear about it, being a leader, not a manager. It's important for a
Mm,
manager, but you'll never be a leader if you cannot admit you made a mistake. If you make a mistake, you own it. And
mm,
sometimes you have to own it pretty publicly, right? And
mm,
and I think there's a bit of a stigma associated with admitting that you made a mistake if you're a leader. But listen, it makes you very human to the people that follow you. It
mm,
makes you very
mm-hmm.
human to anyone associated with that situation where, like, oh my God, the leader just took ownership of this mistake rather than putting it on us. Right.
Mm,
And so I
mm-hmm.
think when you do make a mistake, it's critical that you acknowledge it. You own that you made the call that resulted in an outcome that wasn't expected. You then look at ways you can remediate that, work with your team. Hey guys, okay, we now have to like figure out how to fix this. It's on me, but I need your help, right? And then finally you do a postmortem. Okay, what
Yeah.
could we have done differently in how we made the decision, the data that we used, the people we interviewed, the assumptions that we made that would have resulted in a different outcome.
Nah, this has been amazing, Candace. I like think back of all the top 12 game changing lessons that you've had. I see why now it was a keynote, and even then, it's like you had two more that you've been able to add to this. Absolute, I've learned so much. I will say that, and it's helped in
Thank
so many
you.
situations that I can personally think of. So I can't even imagine for my audience. My last question that I will leave you with is: in a world full of possibilities, what mark do you dream of leaving as a trailblazer for future generations of empowered women?
So this was a hard question for me. Like you told me you were going to ask me this, and I had to think about it. I grew up pretty poor. I fairly modest. Modest income household. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have extras for sure, right? To go to college, I worked full time and paid my own way. And I I dreamt of having a life where I didn't have to worry about income. Originally I wanted to be an oceanographer. I dreamt of being an oceanographer. That's what I went to college for. But it was really about, if I can dream it, I can do it. I just have to
Mm,
figure out how. And so for me, when I face challenges, I always look at them and say, like, okay, how can this challenge contribute to something that I want in life, or something that I'm going after, right? And so I think, if Candace from a small logging town in Southern Oregon can grow up, put herself through college, end up being, a C-suite executive for a couple of companies, then other people can too, right? And so, I'll share another book that I read in my 20s that had an incredible impact on me. And it's a book called Creative Visualization by Shakti Gawain. And it is a book about meditation and visualization, where it encourages you to visualize the life that you want. Visualize how you would like your life to be. And, I did employ meditation and some visualization throughout my 20s. And I found it incredibly impactful. I'm much
mm,
less good at meditation in this part of my life, partly because of time, right? But I think my legacy is, don't assume that the limitations that you may have at any given point in time create a situation in which you are not able to attain your dreams.
mm,
It's a moment in time. Time will change, circumstances will change. You can chart your course. And as long as you own that and take control of it, yeah, there'll be blips, right? Like if you looked at my career, it looks like a circus, that cartoon, the family circus, where the little kid is like going, like this all over the place. Like, that's my career. But ultimately, I I owned it. I charted my course, and I never wavered in my belief that I would attain it.
mm.
And here I am.
Ah, that's
Others
so
can do the
good,
same.
Candace. That was so good. I appreciate you so much. I said I was honored to have you on the podcast, and I'm just like, that was just so inspirational. I want to like jump up right now and give you a big fat hug. So thank you so much
Virtual,
for the
virtual.
lessons that you shared with us, virtual hug, and the context that you gave in all those lessons. And as we wrap up today's session, let's remember that in supporting one another, we amplify our strengths and we break down barriers. So go out there, champion for your dreams, empower your peers, and continue to shape a future where every woman realizes her true potential. Until next time, see ya.